This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again the famous and great Dr. Buck Melton. Welcome, Buck.
Thank you. All I'll say is if I truly am the savant of Macon, as you have said in the past, then all I can say is Macon's in trouble.
Well, just to continue, I would have to say you're one of our leading local public intellectuals.
God help us.
Leading local public intellectual.
But thank you.
All right, on that note, maybe we can talk about other things. Okay. And right now, the country, I would say, seems to be fairly contentious, the less civilized, angry, and to quote the Bible, why do the heathen rage? Why do we have such rage out there? Why are people so angry at one another? And particularly if you watch television at all, you're getting two totally different dialogues about what's up. And in both of these viewpoints, a very extreme, ideas are put out there, and it's like half the country is evil and wicked, and the other half is meritorious, depending on which side of the fence you're on.
Yes.
Well, how are we in this situation? How did this happen? Is this normal, abnormal, or do we worry about it?
I think that this is your bailiwick. I think it's the brain. I think it's the reptile brain. I think it's always been there, and I think it's nothing new. I think that for a variety of reasons it's become more socially acceptable, and it's certainly because of technology become more visible. But it's always been there. I mean, certainly in American history, you've seen fractiousness and violence going back since before the beginning. I mean, look at what whites did to the Pequot Indians, to the northeastern tribes. Look at the Whigs versus Tories during the War for Independence, that it became essentially backwoods feuding. Look at the Civil War. I think the difference now is that we have a device that allows us to communicate in brief staccato sentences or sound bites with complete strangers whom we don't meet in real life, and therefore can be as nasty to them as we want.
Well, I'll accept the idea this is part of the human chemistry. I get it. It's always there. It always will be. But I wonder if there's some factors we can look into that are making it slightly more now than earlier. And I think at least I grew up in the direct post-World War II era. And we had an extraordinary external enemy, the Soviet
Yes.
Union. And sometimes an external enemy causes people to draw together. And so I think that was one of the things going on, is the U.S. was confronted with these enormous challenges, and people come together when such a challenge exists. And you could say, for instance, after 9/11, the country came together. And I think you can also, I can recollect, in 1991 in the Kuwait war, I can remember troops coming down the interstate, coming down the highways, rolling down, and people on the bridges cheering them as they went by. So the absence of at least one could say, a powerful, threatening external enemy causes some centrifugal force. I mean, maybe that's at least one factor that's out there.
I think that's part of it. That one of my earliest memories in school, and it probably would have been around 69 or 70, and it probably was sort of outmoded at that point, was a picture, a drawing of a policeman helping a little boy across a street crossing or something, and holding his hand, and the little boy is smiling up at the policeman smiling at the little boy. And the idea is that the policeman is there to protect and serve. The policeman is our friend. But you juxtapose that with what people my age, about 10 to 15 years before that, were seeing on the television. they were seeing the nice, friendly policemen using fire hoses and police dogs on little black children,
yes,
their own age, and so they're getting a mixed message here. They hear about their fathers telling the war stories of how they fought the Nazis, but the Nazis wore uniforms too. And then, to top it all off, you see the Americans, the good guys, the white hats, going to Vietnam to fight. The first time that the civilian population in America could actually watch at a distance warfare going on. And they see American soldiers doing what any soldiers do, fighting the enemy,
yes.
and they are shocked at what that actually entails. And all of this disabuses them of the notion that America is the good guy and always plays fair, and that it's really the end of our innocence.
Well, let's keep talking about this a little bit, because I mean, there are several points to make, but I think that's a substantial one. The idea of a national religion, so to speak. How are you going to? What is the task of a nation maker? How can we create a nation here? I mean, that's the issue, isn't it? So this is just a foundling in the woods, so to speak. The U.S. It's just hatched out. Other nation states have histories that go back for thousands of years, and a common inherited identity, a common DNA relationship, common history, common religion. All those things are present. So the idea is, the U.S. was a special set of circumstances. One could say the Declaration of Independence was was his birth certificate, and maybe the Constitution is baptismal, I don't know, statement. But we have this country that's hatched out, and to make it work, it requires being part of the American religion, which means moral behavior. And I like to think of this as the third covenant. So the idea is, from a Christian point of view, you could say, well, the Moses, then Christ, then, to sound slightly irreligious, Thomas Jefferson. The idea that we're going to put a moral nation here, and that people that come on the moral nation will be moral people. They'll behave in a moral way, and they'll be blessed with all kinds of responsibilities and virtues and goodness and big heaps of hamburgers every night and good life and air conditioning. All these things would happen. But if the country is immoral, then the whole system falls apart. And so, for many reasons which we might discuss, many people are saying, well, this is just mythology. This is a wicked, terrible country. It's loaded with evil and sin, and therefore, in a way, it cannot exist. You can't, how could you be a part of such a wicked place? You have if it's so wicked, point number one, there's no reason to pledge allegiance to it. It's very wicked. The whole system is wicked. It's corrupt, and it needs to be destroyed, if I could phrase it that way. So at least an earlier concept of the nation needs to be destroyed, and that's in the public domain. If you look at what came out of the 60s, I mean, you could well say, okay, here's the policeman helping the child across the street. Well, the Nazis had a similar picture.
Exactly. Yes.
The SS guy or Adolf has three small children in his lap, or Stalin is like, I don't know, petting a small
Uncle
child.
Joe, yes.
Right. So that's just the common propaganda of the circumstances.
Yes.
But if you have this, I would call it a destructive viewpoint of the country, that the country needs to be destroyed, its actions are wicked, then you get into very, very difficult situation. And in some of the controversy that's going on now, there are people that adhere to at least this third covenant idea that you're in this great country and on and on. And then I think there are a substantial number of people that believe it's just such a wicked country, as witnessed. We can just see examples of whatever's going on. In Iraq, the idea we had the Abu Ghraib, whatever, these horrible Americans
Yes.
are doing stuff. They routinely are blowing children up in Afghanistan. All kinds of bad things are happening. And on the border right now, an example of the wickedness of the country is small children are being torn from their family, and their families are being destroyed by the wicked government.
Yes.
So and you're getting the sort of almost religious struggle here.
Yes.
Is the people that at least believe the country is meritorious or good, and the people that believe it's very evil. And then I'll leave it there, and I'll make the next point after that.
Well, a couple of comments. First of all, your idea of the third covenant is actually almost literally true in some regards. That if you look at some of the religious movements that began or at least flourish in this country after its founding, that they took the idea of a new beginning and a third covenant in a very literal sense. The LDS, Latter-day Saints,
Yes.
is probably the best example, the new revelation of Christ. The Shakers, the New Harmony community. But that's an aside, just to validate.
You say the Great
your point.
Awakening.
Great Awakening, yes. The Second Great Awakening, even more so,
right.
I think, in the 1820s, 1830s. But more to the point, yes, I think that on the one hand, you've got two channels in American history. One is by the very fact that we were, as one historian has said, the first new nation, and that we started small. We could start in a communitarian sense, the New England town meeting. The idea that there really is no distinction between the people and the government, that there's a government by consensus. And once again, if you look at the Society of Friends, their idea of government works that way.
Norman Rockwell's picture
yes.
of freedom of speech, so the New
Beautiful
England town
freedom
meeting,
of
he's
speech.
in his worker's jacket, and he's
Yes.
speaking from the heart, and people are listening. And
It's romanticized, but it's true.
Yes,
that's how
yes,
it got
yes,
started.
yes.
Now, that's not to say it was all roses and lilies all the way, because certainly I think of William Lloyd Garrison, one of the best-known abolitionists, militant abolitionists, and he very clearly, very explicitly, no bones about it, would say that the Constitution is a compact with death and a covenant with hell,
Yes.
because it supports and explicitly countenances slavery.
Yes.
And in public, he would burn copies of the Constitution. And
Right,
so much.
right.
So that has always been there. I think it was really unleashed in all its fury in the 60s. It was the New Left movement, and the idea that our government is now not part of us. It has become its own entity. It has built the military-industrial complex. It has built a nuclear arsenal, which has led to us being placed in the nuclear crosshairs of another country. How could they do this to us? This government has deliberately, systematically lied to us. We're the boss, we're the voter, and yet the Pentagon and the Johnson and Nixon administrations lied to us in Vietnam. And so this really unleashed that vein that gave rise to Garrison. And we say that our own government is evil. It has become estranged from us, and it has done things and allowed things to be done that are purely evil.
And just to continue on that point, I think that's fair. And I think if you probe the complexities of the evil intent, there could be people, we get into the diversity issue, so you have lots of people that are not waspy males.
Yes.
And so if you look at the personification of evil, at least in the New Left viewpoint, they're sort of racist white males that are old stock Americans that are running the country and excluding everyone else. And as they run the country, they're doing things like they're injuring anyone with, I'd say confused sexuality, to use that phrase. Yes. Anyone that doesn't look like them, they're trying to hold the country down, and they're actually trying to injure other countries that are sort of non-WASPy countries,
yes,
where they have the people of different ethnic groups. And so in some ways, the furor that came out of the 1960s is the problem the country has about homogenizing great numbers of people from everywhere with every kind of different opinions, and how do you get them on the same wavelength to share a common ideology?
Yes.
And I think the fury that came out of the 60s in many ways was a subterranean rejection of the sort of the Norman Lincoln Rockwell, or that
Yes.
America.
Yes.
Because that America, that sort of rural, I don't know, waspy world, is not something that people could easily join, or at least they felt they could not. And the power structure of the country existed in an evil fashion, and by the fact they were excluded, or they felt they were excluded from it, that more or less meant it was evil.
Yes.
So it was a quid pro quo that if you could not participate in the country in a way, or the world, or in the power, what you call the power structure, the wealth, or whatever it is, the Preppy handbook, whatever that
Yes.
world is, that was a bad thing. And so we're really in some ways selling the ship, I think, into this question: is some of the tension the country has referable to the fact that it's becoming so diverse that it's making this amalgamation more and more difficult? The diversity of the country is, many people would say, this is really good. We want a, quote, diverse country. We can have lots of nice restaurants, and it's great to get opinions from other people. You can have good, it's not boring. You can say, well, a person can say, this is what I think about Chihuahuas or something, I don't know, or my favorite parakeet is, they're all, or this is a great book for you to read from Southeast Asia, or what about Buddhism? Is there something cool about, all this sort of stimulation
Yes.
for everyone coming together? But it has a tremendous, it causes tremendous conflict.
Yes. Well, it's
Comments?
interesting. Yes. I would say that in a couple of episodes ago, when I was talking about the incorporation of the Bill of Rights
Yes.
Against the state governments. One of the reasons why we did that, why the court felt the necessity of doing that, was the new wave of immigration from Central and Eastern Europe
Yes.
that started up because of the pogroms, because
Right,
of various things in the late 1800s. And so you brought not just different ethnicities, but different political philosophies, different views of the world. And there was a lot of discrimination against those, especially in the North. And so in order to protect minorities, you had to extend freedom of expression, freedom of religion, and say to the state governments, especially in the Northeast, you can't do that anymore. You've got to give them a voice. Now, of course, most of the Irish arrived even well before that because of the potato famine in the 1840s. But in many ways, Irish Americans did not feel that they had truly arrived and had been accepted until the election of John F. Kennedy, more than 100 years later. So I think you're absolutely right about that. And you see this rage that is born of the diversity. And when I think of rage, I really think of around 1964, that clip of Mario Savio in his speech about throwing your body upon the machine.
Yes.
And if you haven't seen that recently, if you want to see pure animal rage, just watch that speech. I mean, it's his ape-like stare. He is so furious he cannot even speak coherently. That's what I think of when I think the 60s.
Yes.
And I think that is the case today, because the thing that is working against homogenization is our technology, the internet. We can now find online communities we are comfortable with, that reaffirm us, that we have common ground with, and then we can develop that bunker mentality against everybody else. And I think it works to divide us. As you've pointed out, diversity, the root is divide.
Yes.
Without the commonality underlaying that, what do you do?
And if you wanted to do it, you could look and see the rise of diversity, like the rise of the machine, the rise of the word diversity.
Yes.
So that'd be a nice thing for a nice student to do. Maybe go back and you can pull the number of times the word diversity is used, and it just is rocketed up as a good thing.
And every time I hear, I've got to jump in here, and every time somebody uses it, especially in an academic setting, I like to say, I do not think that word means what you think it means.
Yes, yes.
What they usually mean is we all look different, but we all think like a Berkeley coffee house.
Yes, that's right.
That is not diversity.
Well, and you could just say these are the schisms that are forming. You can just look at these tension titers that are, to me, a little spooky, more than a little spooky. It does appear certain sections of the country have one viewpoint. The people that live in a certain place have a viewpoint. There's flyover country, and there's not the flyover country. There are people that the idea of being a nativist, to use that phrase, is a bad word. So in other words, if nativist would be you've been here a long time. So if it would be like if you're in Germany and you were Turkish there and you call the Germans nativist, that would mean the same thing. But because the concept is the nativist, if you want to say that, are much weaker here, it really is setting this terrific tension up. And you mentioned briefly the Civil War. One of the things we could get into this is the idea that, at least in my opinion, the South did it. They blew themselves up. They just exploded and destroyed themselves and destroyed their culture, destroyed everything. Maybe it was good in the way it ended, but they did it. And the reason they might have done it was they could not handle in their worldview was so powerfully imprinted that someone calling them wicked was just unbearable. And I throw it that out.
Yeah,
it's more complicated, but I'll throw it.
I think it's more than just being called names. It was the knowledge that Southern whites were becoming both a demographic and therefore a political minority, to the point where foreign values, if you will, could be imposed on them without their consent or permission. Specifically, it's if enough free states come into the Union, then those free states could pass a constitutional amendment forcing white Southerners against their will to do away with the institution of slavery. And they said, we're not going to be taken over by foreign culture like that. We're not going to put up with it.
Well, maybe. I mean, you could, we're sort of off the subject a little bit, but you could say, well, the arguments for a confederacy, and actually it was a well-chosen word. The idea is that we're really going to have a very diffuse power structure here. They're quite well established in the Enlightenment and the whole viewpoint of the Rousseau, the whole deal that popped out of the 18th century. That would be normal to say that, and it would be normal to say too, well, that God made people different, and we have Darwinian stuff there, and this is just the normal way that humans are.
Yes.
And
well, difference doesn't necessarily mean inferior.
But I mean, but you certainly in the 19th century, that's the way people saw the situation.
Yes, but we have the same thing going on today. That the Democratic Party, I think, much more so than the Republican Party, and certainly earlier than the Republican Party, was the party that had a more national outlook, starting with the Progressive Era, and then ultimately a more globalist outlook. All of the major presidents, Democratic presidents of the 20th century, starting with Woodrow Wilson, Franklin D. Roosevelt, they were internationalists, and so they don't mind overriding regional peculiarities, if you will. And so I think it was very interesting to watch, for instance, during the Obama years, the Democrats capitalized on controlling the national machine, the national instrument, to impose a national culture. And anyone who disagreed with that tended to get smacked down very hard. And then when Trump, the nationalist, and the Republicans won control of the national government in 2017, instantly the Democrats rediscovered states' rights, sanctuary cities, not my president. And I think that, so 1860 all over again, of course.
It is, I think, I don't think we can, as we've tried to say, well, this is what's causing some of these tension titers. I think you could say that President Trump is an extreme figure. I think that's a fair statement.
I think we could probably say that. I'm not sure. Go out on a limb.
He's a very extreme person.
Yes.
And I hope he's not listening. If so, you just have to listen.
I don't think we're to the point.
You don't think he's listening? You don't have the espionage is out there?
I don't think they're going to kick in the doors and gun us down.
Okay, well, if that's the case. Nevertheless, I mean, he's sort of the emperor with no clothes. He said things that are out there in regards to political correctness, and we could say what that is. It's some kind of methodologies to keep people sort of together. And if the political correctness goes away, then it really does fray things a lot.
Yes.
And on the other hand, the political correctness was sort of capricious and arbitrary and irrational often.
Yes.
So we have that situation there, and the response, a lot of what's going on, I think, with the contentious world here is if you say you want to swing things back in a certain direction, well, there are ways to do it. But President Trump is really just doing whatever. I mean, there's nothing, no holes being barred as far as I can see. So it really is exacerbating national tensions. One of the things that I guess interests me is reading the New York Times, which I've been reading, decades, and remembering it was really the arbitrator of news and truth in a way, and they were very, very restrained about whatever they put on there in days gone by. And you could say, well, the Nixon era, it's going to be an important bastion of protection for Americans, and they're very restrained and whatever. Well, I would say the New York Times, in some ways, has been provoked so much by President Trump that it's turned into a different newspaper. It really is losing its balance. I mean, really it is. If I can look at it that way, the articles that are collected, it's just, if you go through and read it, it's almost a diatribe, a constant diatribe against President Trump and his viewpoints. It is and such a pro-democratic newspaper. In my opinion, it would have been better, once again, if the New York Times are listening, it's okay, but it would have been better to have been more judicious,
yes,
and be very restrained in attacks and assaults and the news that you picked to put on there. I mean, that would be my comment about it.
It had been, and you're probably a more thorough reader of the Times than I had gotten the feeling from my perusal of it that it had been drifting left for some time. That, for instance, when George W. Bush was president, I recall almost no editorials in support of his policies. Almost all came out against them, which doesn't seem very biased to me. But yeah, I must say that and I try very hard to steer a middle course. On some issues, I'm very liberal. On some, I tend to be more conservative, very conservative in some. But in some of the conversations that I have heard or have had with some real dyed-in-the-wool liberals, and of course most of them are, obviously hate Trump at some level, personally, professionally, or whatever.
Of course, yes.
But some of the more
there's a lot to dislike, I must say.
Indeed.
Yes.
Some of the more introspective, some of the more introspective ones I've talked with have actually said, we, meaning liberals, we must have done something really wrong to provoke such rage from so many people that they would vote this man into office.
What a great insight.
Yes.
What a tremendous insight.
Yeah.
Yes, and that is so really what you're getting, I think you said something very profound. And this is the idea about why we're in this circumstance. The overreach, the idea that, okay, these waspy guys or whatever, we're going to take them out and they've done all that's actually not true.
Yes.
It is not true. And the demonization of the whole country is just not true.
And that's the only
that
option
not
to that.
True.
That half
and
this
so
country are satanic and need to be exterminated.
They are not satanic
yeah.
devil worshippers. They're not throwing babies in the fire. Yeah. They're not torturing people. They're actually quite nice people that are reasonable, that have made the country a great place.
Now, there are some extremists.
Of course, but they're as they are everywhere. But in general, the heart of the country is a good heart. And the flyover country is loaded with very moral people that make the country what it is. And the idea of castigating all those people shows a naivete and a wickedness on the part of the left that needs exposure. If you tried to say that, that's some of the difficulties that are out there. Each side is calling the other side wicked. Well, I call the left wicked, not because they are necessarily wicked, but because they're construing the other guys to be real bad guys. And there's certainly a lot of commonality that could be found.
There is a self-righteousness that you find And the farther out on the wing you go, either on the left or the right, you find more and more self-righteousness. I think the only difference is that I find that the self-righteousness of the extreme left tends to be much more condescending, whereas on the right, there's nothing condescending or sanctimonious. It's just, we're right and we're good, and everybody else.
Right. Yeah. Well, there's certainly plenty of evil to go over those on both sides, and so
no one is without guilt.
I think the thrust of what we've tried to talk about here is some kind of rational discussion about why we're having this tension in the country, and the idea is diffusing this tension and coming up with some appropriate ways to get along with each other, which is a very vexing, difficult problem.
How about the golden rule?
Yes,
something simple like that.
The first thing would be to imagine that people you perceive as your enemies, maybe they're no worse or better than you are. That's it.
And my last one would be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle.
That's a good point, Fucky. Well, thank you for the conversation. That was very useful. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.